What do we want to see Gonzaga do differently between now and the rematch against the Gales in Spokane? Well, it all starts on the defensive end of the floor.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Wednesday and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Game Time. Folks, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Well, it's a mailbag show. Collected up some questions we got after the St. Mary's game, some other questions submitted throughout the week. I'm going to do that for the first two segments of the show, then close out the show talking about Davis Fogle's latest accomplishment, a big one for the 2025 incoming recruit. Talk about Zach Collins getting traded from the San Antonio Spurs, a major award for Andrew Nembhard. Lots of fun stuff to get to close out the show. But we start with our mailbag questions here. This first one comes from Jeff via Gmail. Jeff says, what do you want to see from Gonzaga before they end the season with a big run of quad one games over the last 2 weeks of the year? Yeah, we talked about this a little bit on Tuesday's episode of Locked On Zags, kind of where the Zags are at right now in terms of their net ranking, their KenPom ranking, what they need to do for the last 8 games of the regular season. They have their upcoming 5 games none of them are quad one. I think San Francisco's quad 2. The rest of them, there's a couple quad 4s, a quad 3, their upcoming game on Thursday against LMU. And then they close with 3 straight quad 1 games, including, of course, that game against St. Mary's in Spokane. The main thing for Gonzaga is consistency on the defensive end of the floor. You're not going to be playing as quality of opponents in these next few games. Obviously, San Francisco is a good team. Don't want to discredit them by any stretch. They are a very good offensive team as well, and they have some weapons that could be problematic against Gonzaga, with Malik Thomas in particular being a 20-point per game capable scorer at the 2-guard position for them. But for LMU, they've been playing well as of late, but they don't match up great with Gonzaga. We saw that last time these two teams played. Pacific, it shouldn't be a significant problem for Gonzaga on Saturday. So I think the main things we want to see from this Gonzaga team is more consistency defensively. None of those lapses. Certainly not any full game lapses like we saw against Santa Clara a few weeks ago, or even the Oregon State game where it wasn't a full game lapse, but it was not a particularly good defensive effort from them in Corvallis. And for me, in terms of what I'll be looking for, what I want to see, how do they approach the defense going forward? Because we saw a very inspired performance from Gonzaga defensively against St. Mary's in the second half when they switched to that zone defense. So I'll be curious to see if they continue to use that more. It's a matchup-specific thing. It doesn't always work against teams that are good three-point shooting teams. You don't want to run a zone too much. Santa Clara is a team that the man defense obviously did not work against Santa Clara, and they did run a zone at times in that game, but it was too little, too late. That's a team that's typically, I don't know that you'd want to do a zone against because they can shoot over a zone pretty effectively, but if the man defense is going to continue to have the issues that it's having where the guards are pinching in and they're not getting out on shooters fast enough, maybe you do attempt to do the zone in that situation. More than that, though, better communication in the man-to-man defense, less of that running away from shooters and having to try to find them again and not getting their hands up in time, just better rotations overall, better screen navigation, things in that kind of a lot of things we've talked about over the last week and a half or so, just things we want to see them tighten up in games where we're not as concerned about the result. I mean, we're concerned about the result, but the likelihood of them losing is smaller against LMU, against Pacific, against those teams. And so these are good opportunities to improve in some of those areas where you can focus more on, hey, we need to get these rotations down. We need to get this communication better. For some player-specific stuff, I'd like to see more of Emmanuel Innocente, get him opportunities. He played 28 minutes against St. Mary's. Let's see him continue to play 20-plus minutes a game. But at the same time, I'd also like to see Caleb Battle show some of the promise that we've seen from him at times this year. Maybe you can build up his confidence a little bit in some of these games against teams where you know that he can get to his right hand and score somewhat easily. So you just let him go to work like he did against Oregon State. I know those two things are kind of in opposition of each other. Maybe that means less from Nolan Hickman. Maybe that continues to mean less from Dusty Stromer. Although another player that I would like to see kind of find his mojo a little bit, as he has been really struggling since the calendar flipped to 2025. Would like to see him get back in the mix. He's kind of their clear ninth man at this point. But for this team to be at their ceiling, he needs to be playing much better than he has been. And then last but not least, Michael Ajayi's continued aggressive play style. We saw that in all of his last few games. He didn't play as well against St. Mary's, but that's kind of a product of going up against a really good defensive, physical team. But he looked great in the Portland game. He looked great in the Oregon State game. I'd like to see that continue. A good opportunity to do so against his former teammate, Javon Porter at LMU. One of his few good games prior to the last week was against LMU. So hopefully he can keep that going on Thursday. Next question here comes from Christian via Gmail. Christian says, you mentioned the success of Battle being effective off the bench against another team's second unit or starters now faced with a different style. Part of this is clearly the quality of the opponent. St. Mary's is elite defensively, and that played a part in players and the team as a whole not putting up their normal stat lines. How would you get Battle integrated into the offense in a drive first, get up to the free throw line wayer mentality? Yeah, I wish I knew how to get him consistent, because we've seen how we can get him integrated into the offense. We saw that most notably in the game against Oregon State in Spokane when he came off the bench. He was a part of the second unit. He was kind of given the opportunity to just take the ball and go. He was not being pigeonholed into a role where he had to, be the third option offensively, and he was settling for more outside shots. But even when he's been kind of tasked with being more free-flowing and playing more within his own rhythm, he still seems to occasionally settle for too many outside shots and not look to attack the basket as often as at least I would like to see him do. So I think the best option is to put him in lineups where he has the best chance of succeeding. In my mind, that's a lineup where when Nembhard is on the bench, which is exceedingly rare, but if Nembhard is sitting and you have Battle and Hickman and Stromer on the floor, where Hickman and Stromer are more standstill three-point shooters on the wing, and doesn't matter which bigs, although if you had like Greg and Huff, for example, you have 5 players who are pretty capable of spacing the floor, and then you can just let Battle go to work. But you cannot only play Caleb Battle in a lineup that's completely tailored around him. That's just not feasible. That's not realistic. So you have to find ways to get him to engage, to be present, to know what he's supposed to do and to attack the rim. And he shows flashes of that. He just doesn't show enough consistency with that. And that has been a huge source of frustration this season for the Zags. Next question comes from Connor M on Discord, who says, do you think having Jalen Warley with the team and at practice helps some of the players with their defensive potential, since that is what he's known for? Well, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. Jalen Warley transferred from Virginia. He spent 3 years at Florida State. He transferred to Virginia for his senior year, ended up transferring again before the season even started after Tony Bennett retired, so he never played at Virginia. He's now on Gonzaga's bench as a redshirt. He will be eligible for his final year of eligibility next season, but he's with the team right now. He's been with the team since January. Again, it doesn't hurt. 6'7" wing. He's a 3-year player. He's in his 4th year of college. The experience, the age, the length, the size is disrupting in practice, and he can be a good kind of mentor for guys like Dusty Stromer and Emmanuel Innocente in particular, who I think could really benefit from, learning from his ability to navigate screens and what he does on that end of the floor. Is it impactful in the sense that it's changed Gonzaga's defense this season? Probably not. I don't think his presence can have that kind of impact, but I think the education that he could potentially provide will help Innocente and Stromer get better down the line. Although I think right now most of his focus is not on being the teacher, but on being the student and getting himself prepared for Gonzaga's system for his senior season. Final question, the first segment here comes again from Christian via Gmail. Christian says, what on earth, this question is about Graham Ike. I cut out the first part of it, but he says, what on earth could be said by any player to result in such a quick tech? Will Coach Few bench Ike again to start the next game? How do you assess the situation? Yeah, I don't know. I don't think he was speaking to the refs when he got that technical foul early in the game against St. Mary's. I think he was speaking to the St. Mary's bench or perhaps to the crowd. There are things you can say pretty quickly to get a technical foul. Graham has been known for that. He got called for a double tech against Indiana when McKenzie Mbako hit him with a cold shoulder in the back of the neck. I was shocked that was a double tech, but Graham must have said something that the refs determined was on par with that. Obviously, we saw a technical against Santa Clara as well. So he obviously has a mouth on him. He's obviously known for his shit talking, and some officials put up with that, some don't. I mean, I think that's the kind of a boilerplate explanation, but a true explanation for the situation. In terms of what Mark Few is going to do, I'd be surprised. I wouldn't be shocked, but I would be surprised. I think that the context of Graham Ike's technical foul against Santa Clara, it being late in the game and really costing them significantly in terms of being able to win that game, was more the reason, we haven't seen Mark Few bench players for getting technical fouls all that often. And Graham has gotten technical fouls and not been benched the next game before. So I think that that was more context dependent. Having said that, even if that is the case, the fact that Graham then got another technical foul in a crucial game, even though it was in the first half, even though it didn't impact Gonzaga at all, Marcelonas missed both free throws and St. Mary's didn't score. It literally had no actual impact on the game other than EK picking up a foul. I could still see Mark Few being like, hey, we benched you to teach you a lesson and you still got a technical foul, so we're going to bench you again. I wouldn't be shocked if that was the case. So I could see it going either way. I think there's a justified reason in either situation. Against LMU, you start Braden Huff, you play in the same amount of minutes. I think it works just fine if you choose to do that. So I could see that happening. Well, folks, a prominent college hoops reporter speculated that Mark Few could be nearing the end of his tenure in Spokane. What do we think? We're going to talk about that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, are you looking for tickets for your next big event? Whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sporting event, finding the right ticket at the right price, well, it can be a headache. But with Game Time Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Game Time Picks, the app does all of the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so you don't have to waste your time searching through endless ticket listings. I've been using Game Time Picks for a while now, and here's why I love it. Not only does it show you the best deals, but the app has a view from your seat feature so you can see exactly what your view is going to look like on game day. And the best part, you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund you 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Are you ready to make your next event even better? Download the Game Time app, create an account now, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And we got one more segment of mailbag questions to get through, and we'll close out the show talking a little bit about some future Zags and some past Zags and what they're up to in the NBA. This next question here in segment 2 comes from Christian via Gmail. Christian says, Jeff Goodman recently said, quote, I really do think there's a good chance that this is it for Mark Few, end quote. Do you have any thoughts given the trend that many coaches with miles left on their tires are walking away? Coach Bennett was cited as an example. Yes, so let me say this very clearly. Jeff Goodman does not have a source on this. This is not a knock on Jeff Goodman. He did not pretend that he has a source on this. He was just saying that he believes that this could be the end of the run for Mark Few, that he might be the next high-profile, relatively young coach to retire early, considering we have seen it so many times with Tony Bennett, with Jay Wright being a very recent example or a very notable example from Villanova a few years ago. I think those are the two kind of most notable. Obviously, like Roy Williams and Coach K and various other great coaches have retired recently as well, but they were older at a point where it wasn't as surprising. Recently, we just saw Jim Larinaga at Miami and Leonard Hamilton at Florida State, both retired, but both those guys were over 75. So not really a shock that somebody at that age would choose to walk away from a grueling industry like college basketball coaching. I can also understand why looking at where Mark Few is at right now would lead you to this speculation. He just won a gold medal. He just got the team into the Pac-12. He just got named onto the Hall of Fame ballot, finally. He has the same concerns that, in theory, that other coaches like Jay Wright and like Tony Bennett and like the older coaches of this industry not being what it was when they got into it. And that's fair. Mark Few hasn't publicly trashed this. He's made a few comments of like, it needs to be more regulated, which is fair and accurate. He hasn't come out and complained the way that some of those other coaches did or have in the past. But this is not what college basketball coaching was like when Mark Few started. It's not like what it was for the majority of coaches when they started, because it's been so different in the last half decade or so. All of that points to it being easy to come to that conclusion that, like, hey, maybe Mark Few's next. Tony Bennett, a lot of similarities between the two of them in terms of age, in terms of how long they've been doing this. I could see why you would make that connection. I also want to be clear. There's nothing to indicate that this is happening. Outside of the aforementioned connecting the dots and speculation, there is nothing to indicate that this is happening. Mark Few has never said when he plans to retire. He has never said he is even considering it. The only thing he has made clear is that Brian Michelson is intended to be his successor as the next head coach at this point. And he only said that because he was prompted to. There is no indication that this is a thing that is happening at the end of this season, at the end of next season, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. There's no indication out there. Again, that doesn't mean that it's not. Tony Bennett shocked people when he made the announcement. Internally, there were people who kind of knew, and perhaps there will be people who know internally if Mark Few is planning that. Maybe they know now. Maybe they'll know a few months before it happens. But right now, none of that is not known publicly at this point. I think Mark Few wants to get this team into the Pac-12. I think Mark Few wants to coach Pac-12 basketball games. I think Mark Few wants to take another run at getting to a championship. I mean, their budget's about to increase. They're about to have more money available to them than they ever got from the WCC. That would be a tough time to walk away. I think Mark Few's got plenty left in the tank, and I think he's going to continue to do this. But I'd be lying if I'm not any more confident in that projection than Jeff Goodman is in his. And so at this point, we just don't know. He's playing it very close to the vest. Next question here comes from Jim on Facebook. Jim says, one of our strengths in the past is getting our opponent in foul trouble. Feels like we haven't been as successful this year. Is that true? Yeah, it is. I pulled 6 years worth of data and I put just 2 data points. How many average fouls Gonzaga draws per game, as in how many fouls the opposing team commits per game over the last 6 years, and then how many free throw attempts Gonzaga has had per game. This season, currently, Gonzaga is averaging drawing 17.8 fouls per game, and they're taking exactly 20 free throw attempts per game. Over the past 6 years, the fouls per game is their second lowest. Last year, they averaged drawing 16.7 fouls per game, which is their lowest. The previous 4 years, they were all over 18 fouls per game. 2 of those years were over 19 fouls per game on average that they drew. So the difference between the lowest and the highest in this stretch is not significant. In fact, last year at 16.7 was pretty significantly the fewest amount of fouls drawn. Part of the reason they went out and got Caleb Battle was because they were not good at getting to the free throw line last year. Prior to that, though, they were so good at it because of Drew Timme. Drew Timme was so good at drawing contact. He was not good at making shots at the free throw line. That was not a strength of his, but his footwork, his ball dominance, he was just very, very good at drawing contact and getting himself to the line. Graham Ike has improved. Part of the reason Gonzaga is a whole free throw better this year is because Graham has improved at drawing man contact and getting to the free throw line. Gonzaga's 20 free throw attempts per game this year. That is their third lowest in the past 6 years. The lowest, also last year, under 19 free throw attempts per game last year. Back in the 21-22 season, that was the year with Chet and Drew, they averaged 19.2 free throw attempts per game. Every other year, they've been 20 or higher. Back in 2019-20, they averaged almost 24 free throw attempts per game. This year, they're at 20. That is a massive difference in number of free throw attempts per game. So the idea that Gonzaga is not as good at getting their opponents in foul trouble rings true. Last year was their low in the last half decade at that, and it felt like it with how Graham Ike wasn't as good at getting to the line as he's been this year. It's never been a strength of Braden Huff's, like it wasn't a strength of Ben's. Anton didn't play a style where he got to the line all that much. He was also horrendous as a free throw shooter, but he also just didn't get there very much. It's a guard thing too. Nembhard and Hickman are small, and smaller guards just tend to not get as many calls. I think Strother was better at getting to the line. Hickman just doesn't do it like at all. Like I think he's taken like 6 free throws this year. So it matches the personnel on this roster. And again, that's why somebody like Battle was so important to bring in, and why, as we talked about earlier, it's frustrating that he's not doing as much in that specific category as we expected him to, because I think that's part of the reason, like this data kind of points to him being part of the reason that being part of the reason they brought him here. 2 more questions in this segment, both from Jeff via Gmail. Jeff says, there's been a lot of chatter about UNLV. I'm going to just clarify here. Jeff asked 3 separate questions about Pac-12 expansion. I combined them all here. We're going to answer them all at once. There's been a lot of chatter about UNLV still being a factor for Pac-12 expansion. If so, is it more or less likely a potential deal with UNLV and the Pac-12 would include Nevada as a package deal? What do you think Gonzaga would favor, UNLV alone or UNLV and Nevada together? Yeah, there's a lot of complications with the Pac-12 and the Mountain West right now, and the lawsuit and the grant of rights that Gloria Navarro has recently indicated that UNLV has particularly signed. So I'm not going to get into all the legality. I don't fully understand all of the legality, if we're being honest about it. What I will say right now is Gonzaga would absolutely want both. They should absolutely want both. The rest of the Pac-12 probably only wants UNLV. Nevada's not a great draw for them. Reno is a small city. The football team is historically not good. It's not a great addition for the Pac-12 collectively, but it's a darn good addition on the basketball side of things. Much better than UNLV. Nevada has consistently been better than UNLV. They are better than them this year. They're stumbling a little bit this year, but consistently they would be one of the top half teams in the Pac-12 basketball immediately upon entering. So for Gonzaga, yeah, if they're getting UNLV, they want Reno, they want Nevada. They want Nevada for the basketball, they want UNLV for Vegas. And I think they're right about that being the preferred way that this thing goes, if that's the option the Pac-12 pursues. Next question, how do you think the new ACC deal how much do you think the new ACC deal could push Memphis towards the Pac-12? So the ACC got their new deal with ESPN. They got a lot of money. It makes it much more difficult for them to make any additions at this point. I don't think Memphis is going to the ACC. I don't think Memphis is going to the Big East and trying to house their other sports somewhere else. I don't think Memphis is going to seriously consider trying to throw football somewhere and take the rest of their sports to A10, which is something I've seen suggested. I don't see it. Memphis is going to hold out hope for the Big 12. Maybe, but I'm not holding my breath for that either. In that case, the Pac-12 makes a ton of sense for Memphis, and Memphis makes a ton of sense for the Pac-12. Memphis is the golden goose for the Pac-12, but they got to be able to pay them. I mean, Memphis straight up said, hey, we're not accepting your offer right now because it's not enough money. We're not saying no to the Pac-12. We're saying no to the Pac-12's offer. I believe that was their direct quote. That is pretty telling. If the Pac-12 can get the money to get Memphis, you got to take Tulane. You probably got to take UTSA or North Texas or South Florida or somebody else or multiple somebody else's from the AAC in order to make the travel work. But Memphis is a great addition for the Pac-12. Easy money for the Pac-12 if they can get it done. You just got to come up with the right amount of money. Memphis is not going to settle for much less than they feel they deserve. And what they deserve is probably the top end of what a media rights deal would look like for the Pac-12. Final Pac-12 related question from Jeff. He says, how much would it take for Sac State to successfully buy their way into the Pac-12? 30 million, 40 million or more? Yeah, I just don't see it. I mean, obviously money talks. And if the Sac State has a huge amount of money that they can give the Pac-12 up front, the kind of money that the Pac-12 can use to potentially woo some other big time programs, things like that, maybe they can start to reconsider. But most of the reporting right now is saying it's not happening. John Canzano's recent report said basically close the door on Sac State. Like he's it's done. It's not happening. They're not talking about it anymore. As an FCS program, it just does not make sense to try to bring them into the mix with the hope that their program can become viable in the Pac-12. It's a huge leap, regardless of how much money they've raised. They've also raised like $60 million reportedly, but most of that they want to use for NIL and for various other, facility improvements. If you say you need to give us 40 million of that in order to join our conference, now you're getting a team. Sure, you got $40 million, but you're getting a team that doesn't have enough money to compete. They don't have enough money to upgrade their facilities in a meaningful way. They don't have enough money to add NIL to a football team that is currently is stacked with FCS caliber players. Bringing that to the Pac-12, I mean, they're going to get killed. Like, it's just not going to work. Their basketball team's outside the top 300 at KenPom. There's just not. If you wanted to add a mediocre to bad team in the Bay Area into the Pac-12, just add San Jose State. Like, they're there. They already have, D1, full FBS caliber facilities. They already have more money. Like, just add them. There's obviously complications with that from the Mountain West perspective, but like, Sac State just doesn't make a ton of sense, even if they have a huge influx of cash, and taking that cash away from them just hurts a product that you're bringing into your conference, which is not what the Pac-12 wants to do. Next question here. Jeff says, over the past month, the Gonzaga women have played like a team that could be very competitive as a 9 or a 10 seed, but their net rating is still sitting at 100, indicates that they're probably more like a 13 seed. Assuming the Gonzaga women finish things out and win the WCC tourney, what do you think their ceiling is for the type of seed they could get? Yeah, I think they'd be higher than a 13. I think namesake, name recognition helps, but I also think the committee doesn't blindly look at net. We talked about that on Tuesday's episode. Gonzaga's 11th in the net. They're not going to get a 4 seed, folks. It's not going to happen, even though an 11th in the net points to that. That continues to carry on down the line. If Gonzaga is playing well, if Gonzaga wins out for the rest of the season and wins the WCC tournament, obviously, and they're healthy, they're clicking on all cylinders, the committee is going to recognize that. They're not going to look at their net ranking, which won't climb that much because they're playing a lot of bad teams in the WCC. Let's say they're 90th. The committee's not going to look at that and be like, well, they need to be 12 or 13 or whatever. They're going to look at the fact that they were not healthy early in the year. The committee always takes this into account. If your losses came when your team wasn't at full strength, that matters to them. It is a significant factor that they determine because it is the human element. It's why the seeding is not determined by computers. It's determined by people who use computers as part of what they reference in order to make these decisions. Gonzaga went 6-8 to start the season. They're 9-0 since then. The 6-8 primarily without Taylor Dalton, without Brees Allen-Biet. They had injuries. Now they're missing Maud Hybens, but they're winning games even without her. Sounds like she's going to be back soon. She's dealing with a concussion. So hopefully this is a situation where the committee sees that this team is playing like a 10 seed, as you said, playing like a 9 seed, playing like a better team than a 13 seed, and seeds them appropriately due to that. I think that they will. Of course, Gonzaga has to continue to play well before that conversation can be had, but I'd be surprised if they got seeded in that 13-12 range based on some early season losses. Well, folks, Davis Fogle selected for a prestigious high school hoops event, plus Zach Collins on the move again, and a monthly award for Pacers guard Andrew Nembhard. We're going to talk about all of that coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And we're closing out the show, done with mailbag for this week. Instead, looking at a few news and notes around the Zags. We'll talk some pro Zags here in a second. But first, Davis Fogle, Gonzaga's only commitment in the 2025 recruiting class, was just selected to participate in the Iverson Classic All-American Game. This game is taking place on May 3rd, 2025 in Hampton, Virginia. It is a prestigious high school hoops event started in 2018 by Allen Iverson, as you might have guessed by the name Iverson Classic. And it has frequently landed the top high school players in the country to play at this event. Obviously, they call it the All-American Game. It is not the McDonald's All-American Game. Davis Fogle was not named to a McDonald's All-American. I'm not surprised by that, but getting named to this event, getting selected for this event, whether he was people's top choice or not, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Davis Fogle was named to this event. That is a big deal for him. Players who have played in this event in the past include Paolo Banchero, Jalen Green played in this event. Anthony Edwards. Anthony Edwards is a phenomenal NBA player. They've had some really, really prestigious players in this event. This year's event, alongside Davis Fogle, you got AJ Dibansa. He's the best high school player in the country, going to go to BYU next year. Kingston Flemings, who was a Gonzaga target, who ended up committing to Houston instead. Nate Ament, who's the top uncommitted player in the class as of right now. Jasper Johnson, who's going to Kentucky. Caleb Wilson, who's going to North Carolina, to name a few. There's a collection of fantastic talent. For Davis Fogle, a player who started his high school career at Anacortes High School in Washington, very small school, competed against Cade Orness in the 2A district of the state of Washington. Cade Orness now a walk-on at Gonzaga. Fogle started to show up late on the outside the top 100, just inside the top 100, but wasn't getting a chance to showcase his skills against a lot of high-profile players. He grew from 6'3" to 6'7" and started to get a little bit more attention. He then transferred to Compass Prep in Arizona, which is a basketball factory. They pump out high-level D1 and NBA players on the reg. He's been playing very good at Compass Prep now, all the way up to 33rd in the 2025 recruiting class. According to 247 Sports, I think On3 has him 35th, so he's kind of a consensus top 35 prospect in this class. After a year ago, he was 90th. He has shot up these rankings. The general consensus is that he has yet to reach the heights of his potential. He's only scratching the surface. It makes sense as somebody who grew so much in such a short amount of time. And so for him to get this recognition, to be on the Iverson Classic roster, to get to participate in this event against so many other great high school players, really cool accomplishment for him. Really excited to see how he's able to do before he heads to Spokane for his freshman season in 2025-26. A couple NBA notes here to close out the show. Zach Collins, in case you missed this, was traded. I was planning to do a show where one of my segments would be listing out all of these Zags in the NBA and how likely they are to get traded. Didn't get to do that before one of them did get moved. Zach Collins going to the Chicago Bulls. The Bulls land Zach Collins as well as Trey Jones and Kevin Huerter and some draft picks. Meanwhile, the Spurs get De'Aaron Fox from Sacramento. They also get Jordan McLaughlin, while the Kings in exchange for trading De'Aaron Fox, they get Zach LaVine, Bothell, Washington product. Shout out Bothell, my previous hometown. And they also get City Sissoko and 6 draft picks for moving on from Fox. As a third NBA team for Zach Collins, he started his career with the Portland Trail Blazers and then has been in San Antonio with the Spurs for the last 4 years. He's having the worst season of his career, just in part because he's not playing as much as he has in the past. He averaged over 11 points per game each of the last 2 years. This year, he's averaging just under 5 points per game in about 12 minutes, 3 rebounds, 1.5 assists, shooting 30.5% from three. Now he likely ends up the backup center in Chicago for Nikola Vucevic. We'll see if the Bulls make any more moves, including potentially trading Vuk, in which case Collins could end up with a bigger role on a clearly rebuilding Bulls team. Meanwhile, this trade has a direct impact on Domantas Sabonis, who loses his point guard in De'Aaron Fox and gains Zach LaVine. LaVine, a better scorer than Fox, although barely. He's a better shooter than Fox, but just a different player. Fox was the de facto point guard for Sacramento, but wasn't really a distributor, not really a passer. It's kind of more like a two, just disguised as a point guard. LaVine is a wing, is a full, 2-3 type player, more of a shooter again, but not a good defender. In fact, for Sacramento, Domantas Sabonis, DeMar DeRozan, and Zach LaVine all playing big minutes together. This team is going to give up like 125 points a game. If you like watching high-scoring games, watch the Kings because they're going to score a lot of points, but boy, howdy, are they going to give a lot of them up as well. I don't think any other Zags are going to get traded except Rui Hachimura potentially. The Lakers are in a weird spot right now after trading Anthony Davis. They obviously need front court help, but they just got Luka Doncic in one of the most insane trades, if not the most insane trade that I have ever seen as a sports fan. We'll see what the Lakers kind of do with this. There's not as much depth in the front courts. They don't need to trade for a high salary player anymore after landing Luka. So they may end up keeping Rui. I still think he's the most likely to get traded. Kispert, after signing an extension, he's likely staying with Washington. Kelly Olynyk doesn't really make sense for Toronto to move right now. They kind of want him as a veteran presence. Brandon Clark's not going anywhere. He's not having a great year. I just don't see Memphis needing to move him. And the other guys, no chance. Jalen Suggs not going anywhere. Chet not going anywhere. Sabonis not going anywhere. Andrew Nembhard, we'll talk about him in a second. He's not going anywhere. Julian Strawther makes no sense for Denver to trade him. So I think Rui is likely the only guy who could move in a Gonzaga uniform. I think the trade deadline is the 6th, so this episode coming out on the 5th. So maybe I'll be proven wrong very soon after you listen to this, but I think that the pretty good chance that everybody not named Rui is staying where they are going forward. Closing out the show, quickly talking about Andrew Nembhard, named Defensive Player of the Month in the Eastern Conference. What an accomplishment for Andrew. Best defensive player in his entire conference for an entire month in January. The Pacers 10-2 in January, third in the NBA in defensive rating. Nembhard was injured in December. He got healthy right at the end of December, so his health perfectly coincided with the Pacers putting up the third best defensive rating in the country. He was 1.9 steals per game in January. The advanced stats say the Pacers were about 10 points better defensively with him on the floor than when he was off the floor. He's having a great year. I love seeing this from Andrew. I continue to be so happy seeing his success as a player that most didn't think was going to get drafted, that gets drafted in the second round, that signs the largest guaranteed contract in second round history, that comes a vote away from being an all rookie second teamer as a rookie, and a guy, again, most didn't think would be drafted. Now he's one of the best guards, considered one of the best guards in the conference, at least in kind of like that role-playing guard type. He's not a super high-level scorer, but he's scrappy. He's been shooting the ball well, now gets considered the best guard. I mean, he's in a conference with Jalen Suggs. He's considered the best defensive guard in the conference. If I told you that a player from that Gonzaga roster was named the best guard in the Eastern Conference defensively, every single one of you would say Jalen Suggs. Every single one of you would. Yet it was Andrew Nembhard. Great for him. For the record, Suggs playing great defensively when he's healthy, just has been dealing with some health issues throughout the season, really throughout his career, unfortunately, for Jalen. Nembhard, 10.5 points per game, actually 10.9 points per game, 5.5 assists, 3.5 boards, starting every single game for Indiana, averaging 28.5 minutes per game. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. We'll be back on Thursday, getting you ready for Gonzaga's second game against the Lions of LMU. Talk about how this LMU team has been playing some really good basketball as of late, what it means for the Zags, what we want to see them do in that game on Thursday. We'll also talk a little bit about Andrew's brother, Ryan, and his quest to do something that has only been done 5 times since 1993. If you want to hear more about that, check it out on Thursday's episode. Thanks again, folks, for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and as always, go Zags.